The frozen breath escaped her lips in desperate clouds as Winona Dalton stumbled through the knee-deep snow, her worn boots soaking through with each agonizing step across the Nevada wilderness in the brutal winter of 1878. Behind her, somewhere in the white silence, her three brothers hunted her like wolves tracking wounded prey, determined to drag her back to a marriage she would rather die than accept. Winona had fled her family's ranch outside White Pine 3 days prior, stealing away in the pre-dawn darkness with nothing but the clothes on her back, a small satchel of provisions, and the desperate hope that distance would save her from the fate her brothers had arranged. They had promised her to Edgar Hutchins, a cattle baron twice her age with a reputation for cruelty that extended far beyond his business dealings. Her father had been dead 2 years now, and her brothers saw her as nothing more than a bargaining chip to expand their holdings. At 22 years old, Winona had lived long enough under their roof to know that pleading would accomplish nothing. So she ran. The problem with running in winter was that snow held secrets poorly. Every footprint became a declaration of direction, every broken branch a signpost pointing the way. Winona knew her brothers would follow, knew that Marcus, the eldest at 28, prided himself on his tracking skills. She had pushed herself beyond exhaustion, sleeping in brief stretches beneath pine trees, rationing the dried meat and hardtack she had brought, always moving when the cold became too intense to risk staying still. Now, on the 3rd day, her supplies were gone and her strength was failing. The sky overhead hung heavy with the promise of more snow, and Winona wondered if perhaps freezing to death in the wilderness might be preferable to the life that awaited her if her brothers caught up. She had been heading generally westward, hoping to reach one of the mining camps where she might find work and disappear among the transient population. But the mountains were vast and unforgiving, and she was beginning to suspect that hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Ashton Vale reined in his horse and studied the tracks before him with practiced eyes. The chestnut gelding beneath him snorted, sending his own plume of steam into the frigid air. Ashton had been checking his trap lines when he noticed the tracks, fresh enough that the edges had not yet been softened by wind or new snowfall. He had followed them for the better part of an hour now, and what he found troubled him deeply. The footprints were small, likely belonging to a woman, and they moved with increasing irregularity. Whoever was making them was exhausted, their gait uneven and stumbling. But there were other tracks too, larger ones, belonging to at least 3 men on horseback. These tracks came from a different direction, but were converging on the same path the woman had taken. Ashton was no stranger to trouble in the Nevada territory, but something about this situation sent warning bells through his mind. At 26, Ashton had spent the last 8 years making a living through trapping, hunting, and occasionally hiring out as a ranch hand when winters proved particularly harsh. He had built himself a solid cabin about 10 miles from White Pine, preferring solitude to the complications of town life. His own past held shadows he did not care to examine too closely, a family back in Missouri that he had left behind after his mother's death, unable to bear his stepfather's brutal temper any longer. He understood what it meant to run, and he understood what it meant to be hunted. The decision to follow took less than a heartbeat. Ashton urged his horse forward, following the woman's tracks with increased urgency. The wind was picking up, carrying with it the promise of a serious storm. If she was out here alone without proper shelter, she would not survive the night. Winona had fallen twice in the last mile, and the second time it took her far too long to find the strength to rise. Her hands were numb despite the gloves she wore, and her feet had progressed beyond pain into a frightening lack of sensation. The landscape around her had become a blur of white and gray, trees rising like skeletal sentinels from the snow. She no longer had any clear sense of direction, only the animal instinct to keep moving forward. When she heard the sound of a horse behind her, Winona's heart seized with terror. They had found her. Marcus had tracked her down, and it was over. She tried to run, but her legs would not obey, and instead she stumbled forward, falling face first into the snow. Despair washed over her, cold and complete. "Wait," a man's voice called out, unfamiliar and urgent. "I am not here to hurt you." Winona managed to roll onto her back, staring up at the figure on horseback. Through the haze of exhaustion and fear, she could make out a tall man with dark hair beneath a worn hat, his face weathered but young, his eyes sharp with concern rather than cruelty. He was not one of her brothers. "Please," she managed to whisper, though whether she was begging him to help or to leave her be, she could not say. Ashton dismounted quickly, his boots crunching through the snow as he approached the woman. She was young, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion, her lips tinged with blue. Frostbite was a real danger, and hypothermia was clearly already setting in. He had seen men die from exposure before, and this woman was dangerously close to that edge. "My name is Ashton Vale," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady as he knelt beside her. "I have a cabin not far from here. You need shelter and warmth, or you will not make it through the night. Will you let me help you?" Winona stared up at him, her mind struggling to process his words through the fog of cold and fear. "My brothers," she managed. "They are following me." "I saw their tracks," Ashton confirmed. "We need to move now. Can you stand?" She tried, but her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, Ashton scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile. He carried her to his horse and carefully mounted, settling her in front of him so that she could lean back against his chest. He wrapped his heavy coat around both of them as best he could, then urged his horse into a quick trot. "Stay awake," he told her, feeling how her body slumped against his. "Talk to me. Tell me your name." "Winona," she murmured. "Winona Dalton." "Well, Winona Dalton, you have led me on quite a chase this afternoon. What are you running from?" "A marriage," she said, her words slurring slightly. "To a terrible man. My brothers arranged it. I could not stay." Ashton felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and immediate. He had heard stories like this before, women treated as property to be traded and sold. The fact that it was her own brothers doing this made it even worse. "You will not have to go back," he said firmly. "I give you my word." Winona wanted to believe him, but she had learned not to trust easily. Still, she was too weak to resist, and the warmth of his body behind her was seeping through her frozen limbs, bringing with it a painful tingling sensation. She let herself sag against him, her eyes drifting closed despite his command to stay awake. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. It was small but well built, smoke rising from the chimney indicating a fire still burning inside. Ashton had left that morning expecting to return before nightfall, and he thanked whatever providence had made him bank the fire properly before leaving. He dismounted and carried Winona inside, kicking the door shut behind them against the wind. The interior was simple but clean. A single room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and furs and blankets stacked neatly. Ashton laid Winona on the bed and immediately set about building up the fire, adding logs until the flames roared with heat. Then he turned his attention to the woman. Her clothes were soaked through, and he knew that getting her warm and dry was the priority. "Winona," he said, touching her shoulder gently, "I need to get you out of these wet things. You will freeze if you stay in them. Do you understand? She nodded weakly, too exhausted to care about modesty. Ashton worked quickly and efficiently, his movements respectful as he removed her frozen boots, her soaked dress and undergarments, wrapping her in thick blankets and furs. He checked her extremities, relieved to see that while her fingers and toes were dangerously cold, there did not appear to be severe frostbite yet. He rubbed her hands and feet gently, trying to restore circulation, then prepared a cup of warm broth from the pot that still simmered near the fire. "Drink this," he urged, lifting her slightly and pressing the cup to her lips. Slowly, Winona sipped the broth, the warmth spreading through her chest and belly like liquid life. Her eyes focused on the man kneeling beside the bed, really seeing him for the first time. He had a strong face, with a straight nose and a firm jaw, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a striking blue-gray, the color of winter sky, and they held a kindness that seemed almost out of place in the harsh world she had known. "Thank you," she whispered. "Rest now," Ashton said. "You are safe here." He sat in the chair by the fire, his rifle across his knees, and watched the door. He had seen the tracks of those 3 men, and he knew they would not give up easily. If they came here tonight, they would find him ready. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke around sunset, wind howling around the cabin and snow falling in thick sheets that obscured everything beyond a few feet. Ashton knew that the tracks leading to his cabin would be covered within the hour, which bought them time. No one would be tracking through this blizzard, not even the most determined brothers. Winona slept deeply, her body finally able to rest now that it was warm and safe. Ashton checked on her periodically, relieved to see color returning to her face. He prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and when she stirred near midnight, he helped her sit up and eat. "The storm will keep your brothers away for now," he said, settling into the chair across from the bed. "But when it clears, they will be looking. How badly do they want you back?" Winona wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, grateful that her clothes now hung drying near the fire. "Badly enough to search until they find me. Marcus, the eldest, he is stubborn beyond reason, and the marriage to Hutchins would bring them money and influence they desperately want. I am worth more to them as a bargaining piece than I ever was as a sister. Tell me about this man they want you to marry." She shuddered. "Edgar Hutchins owns half the cattle in this part of Nevada. He is 50 years old, and he has buried 2 wives already. The rumors are that he beat them both, that the second one died from injuries he inflicted. But he is rich and powerful, and my brothers see only profit." Ashton's hands clenched into fists, "and they would condemn you to that life." "They believe a woman exists to serve men's purposes," Winona said bitterly. "My father was different. He believed in education and choice. But he died from pneumonia 2 winters ago, and everything changed. Marcus took control of the ranch, and my other brothers, Thomas and Daniel, they follow whatever Marcus decides. What will they do if they find you? Drag me back by force if necessary. They have the law on their side in their minds. I am unmarried and under 30, which means I am still subject to my family's authority in their eyes." She looked at Ashton directly. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. This is not your fight." Ashton was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "My stepfather used to beat my mother," he said finally. "For years, from the time I was 10 until I was 17. She never ran, always believed it would get better, that he would change. When she finally died, the doctor said it was her heart that gave out, but I knew better. He had broken her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left." He looked up, his eyes hard. "I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone escape that kind of fate, I would. So this is my fight now, too." Winona felt tears prick her eyes. the first tears she had allowed herself since running. This stranger had saved her life and was now offering to stand between her and her brothers, asking nothing in return. "What will we do when the storm clears?" "I have been thinking on that," Ashton said. "White Pine is too close, too obvious. But there is a town called Elko, about 80 miles north of here. It is big enough that you could disappear, find work, start over. I know the trail, even in winter. If we move carefully and cover our tracks, we could get you there safely." "That is a long journey in this weather," Winona said. "And dangerous." "Staying here is more dangerous," Ashton countered. "Your brothers know this area. Someone in White Pine will eventually mention seeing my cabin or knowing me. It is only a matter of time before they connect the dots." "You would travel 80 miles through winter mountains with me?" "I would." Winona studied him in the firelight, this man who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. "Why?" Ashton smiled slightly, the first smile she had seen from him. "Maybe I am tired of spending winters alone in this cabin. Or maybe I just know what is right and what is wrong, and forcing a woman into marriage with a brutal man is about as wrong as it gets." The storm raged for 3 full days, a howling white fury that made travel impossible. During that time, Ashton and Winona existed in a strange bubble of forced proximity that somehow did not feel awkward or uncomfortable. They talked, long conversations that stretched through the hours, learning each other's histories and hopes. Winona told him about growing up on the ranch, about her father who had taught her to read and write and think for herself, who had filled their home with books shipped from back east. She spoke of her mother who had died giving birth to Daniel when Winona was 8, leaving her to grow up surrounded by brothers who increasingly saw her as a nuisance rather than family. She described her love of horses, her secret dream of owning her own small ranch someday where she could breed and train animals without anyone telling her it was not a woman's place. Ashton shared his own story in pieces, painting a picture of a childhood divided between his mother's gentleness and his stepfather's brutality. He spoke of learning to hunt and trap from an old mountain man who had taken pity on him, of leaving Missouri the day after his mother's funeral with nothing but a horse and his rifle. He had drifted west, working ranches and mines, until he found this piece of Nevada wilderness and decided to stay. He talked about the solitude he had craved, the peace he found in living by his own rules, and the growing realization that perhaps there was such a thing as too much solitude. They cooked together, Winona insisting on helping despite Ashton's protests that she was a guest. She proved surprisingly adept in the small kitchen space, and he discovered she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in months. She learned that beneath his quiet exterior was a man of strong principles and unexpected depth, someone who read poetry by firelight and could quote Shakespeare as easily as he could field dress a deer. On the second night, as they sat across from each other at the small table playing cards with a worn deck Ashton kept in his supplies, Winona realized she was happy. Despite everything, despite the danger still lurking beyond the cabin walls, despite the uncertainty of her future, in this moment she was genuinely happy. The realization startled her. "What is it?" Ashton asked, noticing her sudden stillness. "I just realized I am smiling," Winona said. "I cannot remember the last time I felt like smiling before today." Ashton reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Then I am glad the storm has given us this time." Winona felt her heart skip at the touch, at the warmth in his eyes. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had planned but both were beginning to recognize. It frightened her, this feeling, because it made her vulnerable in a way that running through the snow never had. but it also felt right, like a door opening onto a future she had not dared to imagine. The storm finally broke on the morning of the fourth day, revealing a world transformed by snow. Drifts reached nearly to the cabin's windows in places, and the trees bent under the weight of accumulated white. Ashton knew they needed to leave soon, before Winona's brothers could resume their search, but the snow would make travel even more challenging. They spent the day preparing, Ashton gathering supplies and packing his horse, and a second one he kept in the small stable behind the cabin. Winona helped, having fully recovered her strength, and they worked in companionable silence broken by occasional conversation. There was an awareness between them now, an electric current that sparked whenever they accidentally touched or their eyes met. That night, their last before beginning the journey north, they sat before the fire as they had the previous nights. But this time the silence held weight, anticipation, things unspoken but deeply felt. "Winona," Ashton said finally, his voice low. "When we reach Elko, I want you to know that you will not be alone. I have some money saved, enough to help you get established until you find work, and I will stay as long as you need me to." "Why would you do all this?" Winona asked, though she thought she knew the answer, hoped she knew. Ashton rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat on the edge of the bed. He knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "Because in these few days, I have come to care for you deeply. Because when I look at you, I see someone strong and brave and beautiful, inside and out. Because I think maybe we both have been running from different things, and maybe we have found something worth running toward instead." Winona's breath caught. "Ashton, I am not free. I am still being hunted. My brothers will not stop looking, and I do not know if I can ever truly be safe." "How can I ask you to tie yourself to that?" "You are not asking," he said firmly. "I am offering. And yes, there will be challenges, but I would rather face those challenges with you than spend another winter alone pretending that this kind of connection is something a man finds twice in a lifetime." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I feel it too, this thing between us. It terrifies me. That makes two of us," he smiled. "But some things are worth being terrified over." Winona leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as he responded. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the last of her walls crumbling. This was what she had run toward without knowing it, this connection, this person who saw her as more than a transaction or a burden. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Ashton rested his forehead against hers. "We should leave at first light. The journey will be hard, but we will make it together." "Together," Winona repeated, and the word felt like a promise. They left as the sun rose, two figures on horseback moving through a landscape of pristine snow and bitter cold. Ashton led, choosing their path carefully, sometimes detouring to follow frozen creeks where their tracks would be harder to spot. Winona followed close behind, her body still adjusting to long hours in the saddle but her determination unwavering. The first 2 days passed without incident, though they kept constant vigilance. At night they made cold camps, not risking the smoke of a fire that might give away their position. They slept huddled together under blankets and furs, sharing body heat and whispered conversations about the future they were beginning to build in their minds. On the third day, as they crossed a high ridge, they spotted riders in the distance behind them. Even from far away, Winona recognized the way Marcus sat his horse, the distinctive gray her brother Thomas favored. "It is them," she said, her voice tight with fear. Ashton studied the riders through the clear mountain air. "They are at least 2 hours behind us, and they have not seen us yet. We have an advantage, but we need to move fast." They pushed their horses hard, descending the far side of the ridge into a valley thick with pine forest. Ashton led them in a winding path through the trees, deliberately creating a confusing trail, then found a narrow ravine where they could hole up and let the horses rest. "Will they find us?" Winona asked as they crouched in the ravine, the horses standing quiet behind them. "Maybe," Ashton admitted. "Marcus sounds like a determined man, but determination is not the same as skill, and I have spent 8 years learning every trick these mountains have to teach." They waited in tense silence as the afternoon wore on, and eventually they heard voices echoing through the valley, the sound of men calling to each other as they searched. Winona pressed close to Ashton, her hand gripping his arm, and he wrapped his free arm around her shoulders. The voices came closer, then gradually faded as the search moved in a different direction. They waited until full darkness before moving again, traveling by moonlight across terrain that would have been treacherous even in daylight. But Ashton's knowledge of the land proved invaluable, and by dawn they had put another 20 miles between themselves and Winona's brothers. "You think we lost them?" Winona asked as they finally stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack. "For now," Ashton said. "But your brother sounds like the type who holds a grudge. We need to be careful even after we reach Elko." Winona nodded, but some of the fear had left her face. "I used to think courage meant not being afraid, but I am learning it means being afraid and moving forward anyway." "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met," Ashton said seriously. "You chose the risk of death over a life you could not accept. That takes more courage than most people ever find." The remaining days of travel passed in a blur of cold, exhaustion, and growing anticipation. With each mile, the danger seemed to recede slightly, though they never fully let down their guard. Ashton and Winona grew closer with each shared hardship, their bond forged in the crucible of adversity. They talked about everything and nothing as they rode. Winona described her dream ranch, the horses she would breed, the life she would build. Ashton shared his own dreams, some he had not even admitted to himself before now. The possibility of a real home, not just a cabin for shelter but a place built with someone else, shared with someone he loved. Children someday, a family created on foundations of respect and partnership, rather than the twisted dynamics both their pasts had shown them. "You think such things are really possible?" Winona asked one evening as they camped in the shelter of an overhanging cliff. "After everything we have both seen and experienced, I think we make them possible," Ashton replied. "I think we choose to be different to build something better. It will not be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." On the 10th day after leaving the cabin, they crested a hill and saw Elko spread out in the valley below. It was bigger than White Pine, a bustling mining and railroad town with wide streets and numerous buildings. To Winona, it looked like possibility made manifest. They rode into town in the late afternoon, drawing a few curious glances but nothing more. Travelers were common in Elko, people coming and going with the mining operations and railroad work. Ashton led them to a modest boarding house run by a stern but fair-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson. "I need 2 rooms," Ashton said, though the words cost him something. He wanted nothing more than to claim Winona as his own, but he would not compromise her reputation, not when she was trying to start a new life. Mrs. Patterson sized them up with sharp eyes. "You married?" "Not yet," Ashton said firmly, "but soon if the lady agrees." Winona felt her heart leap at the words, at the certainty in his voice. She stepped forward. "2 rooms will be fine, and I will be looking for work if you know of any positions available." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "As it happens, I could use help here at the boarding house. Cooking, cleaning, laundry. It is hard work, but I pay fair and provide meals. You interested?" "Very much so," Winona said gratefully. They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Winona worked at the boarding house, proving herself capable and hardworking. Ashton found employment at one of the larger stables in town, his skill with horses quickly making him valuable. In the evenings, they would walk together through the town, talking and planning, always chaperoned by the watchful eyes of respectable Elko society. Ashton courted Winona properly, despite the unconventional beginning to their relationship. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers preserved despite the winter, a book of poetry he found at the general store, ribbons the color of her eyes. She treasured each offering, but more than the gifts themselves. She treasured the thoughtfulness behind them, the care he took in learning what pleased her. 2 months after their arrival in Elko, Ashton took Winona for a walk up into the hills above town. It was late March now, and the first signs of spring were beginning to show, tiny green shoots pushing through the last remnants of snow. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley, and Ashton took her hand. "Winona Dalton," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his nervousness. "I know we have not known each other long by most standards, but I have learned that sometimes a person knows, just knows, when something is right. You are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I love you with everything I am. I want to build a life with you, a real life based on partnership and respect and love. Will you marry me?" Winona felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes. "I love you, Ashton Vale, and I want nothing more than to spend my life with you." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, a ring he had saved for weeks to purchase. It was not fancy, but it was real and solid, like the love they shared. He slipped it onto her finger, and then they were kissing, wrapped in each other's arms as the spring sun warmed their faces. They were married a month later in the small church in Elko, with Mrs. Patterson and several of their new friends as witnesses. Winona wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Ashton wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his face shining with happiness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ashton kissed his bride with such tenderness and passion that even the most hardened miners in attendance felt their eyes mist over. They rented a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but solid and theirs. Ashton continued working with horses, while Winona kept her position at the boarding house, both of them saving every spare penny toward their shared dream of buying land and starting their own horse ranch. The shadow of Winona's brothers still lurked at the edges of their new life, a concern that neither could fully dismiss. They had chosen Elko partly because it was far enough from White Pine that casual searching would be unlikely to find them, but Winona knew her brother Marcus well enough to know he would not give up easily. The confrontation came 8 months after their arrival, on a bright October afternoon. Winona was walking home from the boarding house when she saw 3 familiar figures on horseback at the end of the street. Her blood turned to ice as Marcus spotted her, his face hardening with recognition and rage. She turned and ran, not toward their house, but toward the stable where she knew Ashton was working. Her brothers spurred their horses forward, calling her name with voices that promised retribution. People on the street stopped to stare, and Winona's heart pounded with terror as she burst through the stable doors. "Ashton," she gasped, and he was there immediately, taking in her fear and the sound of horses approaching outside. Marcus dismounted and strode into the stable, his brothers flanking him. He was a big man, taller than Ashton and heavier, with the same dark hair as Winona but eyes that held none of her warmth. "Winona, "You are coming home," he declared. "This nonsense has gone on long enough." "I am home," Winona said, moving to stand beside Ashton. "I am married now, Marcus. Legally, you have no claim on me." "Married to some drifter you do not even know," Thomas sneered. He was leaner than Marcus, but no less hostile. "Whatever he has told you, whatever he has promised, it is lies. Men like him are users, and when he is done with you, he will move on." "You do not know anything about him," Winona said fiercely. "And you do not get to make decisions about my life anymore." Marcus's face reddened with anger. "Hutchins is still willing to marry you if you come back now. We can tell people you were ill, that you went to stay with relatives for treatment. Your reputation can be salvaged, and you can still fulfill your obligation to this family." "My obligation," Winona said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear now, "is to myself and to my husband. I have no family obligation to men who would sell me to a brute for profit." "You ungrateful girl," Marcus snarled, taking a step forward. "After everything we have done for you, after keeping a roof over your head and food in your belly, this is how you repay us." Ashton stepped forward, placing himself between Winona and her brother. "That is far enough. Your sister has made her choice, and it is a choice the law will recognize. She is a married woman now, and she is under my protection, not yours." "And who are you?" Marcus demanded. "Some nobody living in a rented house, working for pennies at a stable. You think you can provide for her better than we can." "I think I can provide what she actually needs," Ashton said calmly. "Respect, freedom, safety, love, things you never offered her." Marcus moved with surprising speed for his size, his fist swinging toward Ashton's face. But Ashton had grown up dodging his stepfather's blows, and he moved faster, stepping aside and letting Marcus's momentum carry him forward. The older man stumbled, catching himself on a stall door, and spun back with rage contorting his features. "Stop this," Winona cried. "Marcus, please. I do not want to fight with you, but I will not go back, not ever. You can either accept that and leave us in peace, or you can keep pursuing this and make enemies of the entire town." As if in response to her words, several men appeared in the stable doorway, drawn by the commotion. Among them was the town marshal, a weathered man in his 50s named Tom Brennan, who had developed a fondness for the young couple who had arrived in town the previous winter. "There a problem here?" Marshal Brennan asked, his hand resting casually on his pistol. Marcus assessed the situation, recognizing that he had lost the advantage of intimidation. "Just having a family discussion with my sister," he said tersely. "Your sister, who is now Mrs. Vale, a married woman and resident of this town under my jurisdiction," Brennan said mildly. "She looks to me like she does not want to have this discussion. So maybe you and your brothers should consider heading back to wherever you came from." The standoff lasted another tense moment before Marcus's shoulders sagged in defeat. He looked at Winona with an expression that might have been regret or might have been frustration. "You are making a mistake," he said. "When this all falls apart, do not come crawling back to us." "I would not," Winona said quietly. "Goodbye, Marcus." The three brothers left, mounting their horses and riding out of Elko without looking back. Winona sagged against Ashton, the adrenaline draining from her body and leaving her shaking. He held her close, murmuring reassurances, while the marshal and the other men offered words of support. "They will not be coming back," Marshal Brennan said confidently. "Word will spread about what happened here today, and if they show their faces in Elko again, they will not receive a friendly welcome." That night, in the safety of their small house, Ashton and Winona held each other close. The confrontation with her brothers had been frightening, but it had also been liberating. The threat that had hung over them was finally resolved, not through violence or tragedy but through community and standing firm. "It is really over," Winona whispered. "They are gone." "It is really over," Ashton confirmed, kissing her forehead. "Now we can focus on building our future without looking over our shoulders." The years that followed were full of hard work, joy, and growing love. Ashton and Winona saved diligently, and 3 years after their marriage, they purchased 100 acres of land northwest of Elko, beautiful rangeland with good water and shelter. They built their ranch slowly, doing much of the work themselves, creating something that was truly theirs. Winona's dream of breeding horses became reality. She had an eye for bloodlines and a gift for training, and their horses quickly gained a reputation for quality and temperament. Ashton handled the business side of things and worked alongside his wife in all the physical labor the ranch demanded. They were partners in every sense of the word, their marriage built on mutual respect and deep love. Their first child was born in the spring of 1882, a healthy boy they named Andrew David, combining Ashton's initial with Winona's maiden name. Winona proved to be as natural a mother as she was a horsewoman, though she refused to give up her work with the animals even with a baby to care for. Ashton had never doubted she would find a way to do both. 2 years later, their daughter Sarah arrived, with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue-gray eyes. The ranch house they had built was filled with laughter and love, everything both Ashton and Winona had dreamed of but never quite believed possible. On winter evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch chores were done, Ashton and Winona would sit before their fireplace much as they had in that first cabin so many years ago. They would talk about their days, make plans for the future, and simply enjoy being together. "Do you remember that day you found me in the snow?" Winona asked one such evening, settled comfortably against her husband's side. "Every detail," Ashton said. "I saw your tracks and knew someone was in trouble. I had no idea I was tracking the woman who would become my entire world." "I thought I was going to die out there," Winona admitted. "I had accepted it, even welcomed it as better than the alternative. And then you appeared like some guardian angel sent to save me." "We saved each other," Ashton corrected. "You gave me a reason to stop hiding from life, to build something real instead of just existing." Winona turned to kiss him, the kiss of a woman who knew exactly how fortunate she was. "I love you, Ashton Vale. Every day I love you more than the day before." "And I love you, Winona Vale, now and always." The years continued to pass, bringing their own challenges and triumphs. The ranch prospered, their children grew strong and healthy, and the love between Ashton and Winona only deepened with time. They heard occasional news from White Pine, learning eventually that Edgar Hutchins had died of a heart attack, and that her brothers had lost much of their ranch to bad debts and poor decisions. Winona felt no satisfaction in their misfortune, only a distant sadness for what might have been if they had chosen differently. When their children were old enough to understand, Ashton and Winona told them the story of how they met, how sometimes the hardest moments in life can lead to the greatest blessings. They taught Andrew and Sarah that courage means standing up for what is right even when it is difficult, that love is partnership and respect, and that family is built through actions rather than just blood. More children came over the years, another son they named William and twin daughters, Rose and Claire. The ranch grew with the family, eventually encompassing 300 acres and employing several hands to help with the work. But no matter how busy life became, Ashton and Winona always made time for each other, protecting the connection that had begun in desperate circumstances and grown into something beautiful and enduring. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children now grown with families beginning of their own, Ashton took Winona back to the site where he had first found her tracks in the snow. It had taken some doing to locate the exact spot, but he had managed it, driven by the significance of the place. They stood together in what was now late spring, wildflowers blooming where snow had once nearly claimed Winona's life. "Hard to believe it has been 25 years, Winona said, her hand in her husband's. She was 47 now, her beauty matured but undiminished, her strength evident in every line of her body. 25 years of the best life I could have imagined," Ashton said. He was 51 now, his hair touched with gray but his eyes still that same striking blue-gray that had captivated Winona from the first. "When I saw your tracks that day, I could not have known I was following the trail to my future. All my life I will be grateful you followed," Winona said. "That you saw someone in need and chose to help, asking nothing in return." "Oh, I received plenty in return," Ashton countered with a smile. "A wife, a family, a life beyond anything I dared dream of. I would say I came out well ahead on that bargain." They stood together watching the sun set over the mountains. Two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built a life filled with light. The hardships they had faced, the dangers they had overcome, all of it had forged them into who they were, individually and together. As they rode back to their ranch, to the home they had built, and the family they had created, Winona reflected on how strange and wonderful life could be. She had run into winter desperation, certain she was running toward death, only to discover she was actually running toward life. Real life, full and rich and exactly what she had needed without knowing it existed. The ranch lights glowed warm in the gathering dusk, and smoke rose from the chimney of the house where their children and grandchildren had gathered to celebrate the anniversary. There would be dinner and stories and laughter, all the things that made a life worth living. Ashton and Winona dismounted and walked hand in hand toward the house, toward the celebration awaiting them, toward the future that stretched ahead still full of promise and possibility. The winter that had nearly killed Winona had instead given both of them the greatest gift imaginable: each other, and the love story that had grown from desperate tracks in the snow into a legacy that would endure for generations. Inside the house, surrounded by family and love, Winona caught Ashton's eye across the room and smiled. He smiled back, that same gentle, loving smile he had given her in a cabin so many years ago when he had promised she was safe. She had been safe then, and she was safe now, not because there were no more dangers in the world, but because they faced everything together. Their youngest daughter, Claire, stood to offer a toast. "To my parents," she said, raising her glass, "who proved that true love exists and that it can overcome any obstacle. May we all be as fortunate in our choices as they were in finding each other." "Hear, hear," the family chorused, and Ashton and Winona stood together, still hand in hand, still partners, still deeply in love after a quarter-century together. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, they lay together in their bed, the same bed they had shared for over 2 decades. Ashton held Winona close, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sensing she was still awake. "About how lucky we are," Winona said softly. "About how easily things could have gone differently. If you had not checked your trap lines that day, if you had not followed my tracks, if you had not cared enough to help a stranger." "I think we were meant to find each other," Ashton said. "I am not usually one for talk of fate or destiny, but when I think about all the little choices that had to align perfectly for our paths to cross, it seems like more than mere chance." "Maybe you are right," Winona agreed. "Maybe we were always meant to find each other one way or another, All I know for certain is that I am grateful beyond words for every day I have had with you." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Ashton assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Now and always, Winona. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They drifted off to sleep together, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The desperate woman running through the snow and the cowboy who followed her tracks had become so much more than either could have imagined. Their love story a testament to courage, hope, and the transformative power of choosing to help rather than to ignore. Years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brings. Ashton and Winona grew older, but their love never diminished. They watched their children build successful lives, welcomed grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, and continued to work their beloved ranch for as long as their bodies would allow. When Ashton was 73 and Winona 69, they finally retired from active ranch management, turning operations over to their son Andrew while they moved into a smaller house built near the main ranch house. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, reading together, walking the land they loved, and telling stories to the endless stream of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came to visit. On a winter evening much like that first one so many decades ago, they sat before their fireplace wrapped in blankets. Outside, snow fell gently, covering the world in white. Winona watched the snow with a thoughtful expression. "You know what I think about when I see snow now?" she asked. "What is that?" Ashton responded, his voice a little rough with age but still warm with love. "I think about beginnings," Winona said. "About how the cold that nearly killed me instead brought me to you. How winter, which seems like a time of death, was actually the beginning of my real life. I see snow now, and I see possibility rather than danger." Ashton squeezed her hand gently. "You have always been able to find beauty and meaning in things, even difficult things. It is one of the many reasons I love you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire and the snow. Two people who had shared a lifetime and would share whatever time remained with the same grace and love they had shown from the beginning. Their story, which had started with desperate flight and tracks in the snow, had become something beautiful and enduring, a love story for the ages. The ranch they had built would continue for generations, their children and grandchildren carrying on the traditions of quality and integrity they had established. But more than the land or the horses or the success, Ashton and Winona's legacy was the love they had shared and modeled, proving that even in the hardest circumstances, choosing courage and compassion could lead to extraordinary joy. As the fire burned low and the snow continued to fall outside their window, Ashton and Winona moved carefully to their bed, helping each other as they had learned to do, as age made certain movements more difficult. They lay down together, as they had every night for nearly 50 years, and Ashton pulled Winona close against him. "I love you," she whispered, the words as meaningful now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Ashton replied, kissing her forehead gently. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They fell asleep together, the snow falling softly outside, two hearts beating in rhythm, two lives intertwined so completely that they had become one story, one beautiful, enduring love story that had begun in winter desperation and bloomed into a lifetime of joy. The cowboy who had followed tracks in the snow and the woman who had been running for her life had found in each other everything they needed, building a love that would last not just a lifetime but would echo through generations, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, courage over despair, and hope over resignation.